Now the last function we need to talk about is the predominant function, sometimes called the subdominant function as well, which is the most versatile of all the functions that we've talked about so far, since it's all the chords that we can use in between the tonic and the dominant. In other words, we can use the predominant function to move to the dominant. And we can get pretty crazy with this one. Roughly though, we can categorize the predominant function into two different categories. There are chords built on the fourth scale degree and chords built on the second scale degree. And notice that I say chords built on rather than just simply the 2 and the 4 chord. And what this means is that yes, the 2 and the 4 chords, they have the predominant function, but there are lots of other chords we can build upon these scale degrees, the 2 and the 4, which will function in the same manner. And this includes all inversions as well. So for example, chords built on the 4th scale degree could be a 2 chord in first inversion, a major 4 chord obviously, but also a minor 4 chord, and even weird chords such as a flat 2 chord in first inversion and other stuff like that. So I think this calls for an example. Let's, for all of these examples, we're going to start with our tonic chord, and this time we're in major, which we were last time I think as well. So let's first start with the first chord I mentioned, which was a 2 chord in first inversion. So if we have a 2 chord, first inversion, to refresh your memory, what it means is that we take the lowest note of the chord and we transpose it up an octave like that. And that's a first inversion. If we then take the lowest note and we do that again, we call that second inversion. So they're the same chords, but the notes are in a different order. So if we take this lowest note here and we transpose it up an octave, we get a 2 chord in first inversion. And this chord functions as a predominant. So after this, we want to go to a dominant chord, which, if you remember, could be a 5 or a 7. So let's add a 5 chord there and see what this sounds like. So now we have a 1 chord, a 2 chord in first inversion, and a 5 chord. You can hear how it really nicely travels to that 5 chord, and then of course that 5 chord would really like to go to this chord, which is the 1 again. So in total, now we could also have a 4 chord, of course, and that one would be a regular F chord. So let's use that one, and this will behave in the same manner. Now, interestingly enough, like I said, we can build a lot of chords on this scale degree. So right now we're talking about the 4th scale degree. What we could do is we could take this chord and make it minor. And in that case, we talk about modal borrowing. And modal borrowing means when you borrow a chord from a different mode or a different key. So in this case, we're in the key of C major, but we're borrowing the 4 chord from the minor scale. And that one then still wants to go to that 5. That sounds fresh, right? It has this nice exotic sound to it. Now, one that's even more exotic would be a flat 2 chord in first inversion. So let's think about it. When I say that, I realize it sounds kind of complex probably, but let's analyze that step by step. So we have a flat 2 chord in first inversion. So let's first start by just making a 2 chord, and in C that's going to be this chord, D, F, A. But then we need to flatten this chord. So rather than having it be a regular 2, we need to make that a flat 2. So that's going to be a D flat, and then the 5th is going to be an A flat. So this is now a major chord. This would be, we could call this a D flat major chord, but in the case of if we're talking about C, we would call this a flat 2 chord to sort of show that it's which scale degree we're using, because that's important for the movement. So this is that thing where we're not looking at individual chords anymore, but we're looking at the chords in context of the full progression. And this specific chord usually is being used in first inversion, like I said. So now all we need to do is we take that lowest note and we transpose it up an octave. And now we have a flat 2 chord in first inversion, which is a predominant chord, and it wants to move to this 5 chord. So if we play this progression, it sounds completely acceptable, even though we have this D flat in there, which is not in the scale, and we have this A flat in there, which is also not in the scale. So because we're using these functions, we can do quite a lot of weird things because the overall structure is still the same. Now I just want to point out this chord is also called the Neapolitan sixth chord, and the sixth in this case doesn't refer to a scale degree. It refers to an inversion, which is something that we haven't talked about much. Well, we've talked about inversions, which is simply like first inversion, second inversion, but with classical music or with classical analyzers, they will use numbers to show inversion, and a sixth chord means a chord in first inversion. And the reason they call it a sixth chord is because the interval now between the lowest and the highest note is the interval of a sixth. So don't get that confused with the sixth chord, which is a chord built upon the sixth scale degree. Now the other category of predominant chords are chords built upon the second scale degree. And this category is also called the dominant of the dominant chords. Well, what the heck does that mean? Well, we already know that the 5 chord is a dominant chord in any key. So the 5 always wants to move to the tonic, wants to move to the 1. But then that sort of raises the question, what wants to move to the 5? Well, the 5 of 5, and this is literally what we call the second scale degree. If you think about, okay, so let's go back. We're going to simplify this again. We have our 1 chord, and then here we have our 5 chord, right, which is a G. Now the 5 of 5 is D, which is this one, and that happens to be the second scale degree of our C major scale. So we call this second scale degree the 5 of 5. So let's go with a few examples that use this 5 of 5 technique, which is also sometimes called applied dominance. So let's start with a regular 5 of 5 chord. So to do that, we first have our tonic, and then here we're going to build a 5 chord, which is going to be the G, and now we need to find the fifth of that. So that's going to be a D chord, and let's build a D chord. It's going to be a major chord on the 5th scale degree, or sorry, on the 2nd scale degree. This we would call a 5 of 5 or applied dominance. And then of course we need to resolve that back to our 1 chord. Hopefully by now you're starting to get the hang of these functions and what they do. Right, it feels a little bit more resolved if we go down here. It sounds, so this is the thing where I mentioned that the tonic chord, the tonic function can both sound like a beginning, but also like an ending here. So it's for the start of a progression, and it can be for the end of the progression if you want to give the whole progression some sort of resolution. So this is a regular 5 of 5 chord. We can also use the more common 5/7 of 5 chord. So to do that, we need to add a 7 to this, and to find our dominant 7th chord, what we do is we take the root and we lower it 2 steps. So that gives us a C. So if we add a C here, now we create a dominant 7th chord. And of course we could do that with this 5 chord as well, and then we would add the F, and now this is also a 5/7 chord. Now, since the 5 and the 7 chord were both dominant chords, it means that we could also use a 7 chord in this place. So we'd have to find the 7th of G, which happens to be an F. And once again, we can find that by lowering the tonic of our chord, the root of our chord, 2 half steps, which would make us end up at an F. So F is the 7, or the 4 chord is the 7 of 5. And traditionally speaking, we would make this a diminished chord because the 7th scale degree is diminished in major scales. It's nice, right? It gives a lot of tension, but the tension is no problem as long as you resolve it. Like if you do something like this and then you leave it hanging or you go into a completely different direction, then it can sound kind of odd. But now, because we're using these functions, we resolve all the tension that we create, and that gives a very nice contrast. And we can play this a little bit faster. That's nice. Now, one thing we could try here is we could add another C sharp to there, because that's going to be the leading tone of the 5th in the 5 chord. So you can hear that at this scale degree we can create quite a lot of tension. Now also notice one other important thing with this is we mentioned the leading tone before, and that the leading tone, it really wants to resolve to the tonic. We can also think about the leading tone of 5. So in the case of C, the leading tone was B. So if we do something like this, this note is going to have quite a lot of tension, and it wants to go back to this note. And that's when it feels at home. But the 5 also has that leading tone. So if you think about our 5 chord, which is the G chord, then the leading tone of that would be F sharp. And this is why a lot of effective chords, such as that 2 chord that we use the major version so that we have that F sharp in there, which is the leading tone to the 5 chord. And we could make this a minor chord as well, but it has less of a pull because it doesn't use that leading tone. It still sounds nice, but it just has less tension. I'll make these a little bit longer. And compare that to this one. Has a lot more tension. Now lastly, there's one other concept before we get into the examples, and those are augmented 6th chord. And we haven't talked about those at all, but augmented chords, they are major chords with a raised 5th. So remember, with diminished chords we had a minor 3rd and then a 5th, and then we lowered the 5th. So this would be a C diminished chord. It sounded like that. With an augmented chord, we have a major chord, so a major 3rd interval and then a perfect 5th, but then we augment or we raise that 5th. This would be an augmented chord. And the augmented 6th chord is a chord that has a predominant function as well. And usually these are being used in a minor scale. So let's test that. Let's start with a C minor this time, and we'll make it a full bar, and then we'll add the 6th of C minor. So the 6th scale degree of C minor is A flat. So we add an A flat here, like that. And then the 5 of that is the E flat in this case. So let's raise that, let's augment that, and then after that we go to a 5 chord. Can hear how that creates quite a lot of tension, and then here we can resolve that. Now usually these are being used in an inversion as well, so the way I'm using it right now is not very common. It would be more common to use it like this, and then let's transpose it down an octave. maybe something like this. And then just to create this feeling a little bit stronger, let's add the 7th to our dominant chord there. And now we get this nice chromatic movement. And then I'll move this one down an octave. And maybe this one as well. Let's see what that sounds like. That sounds pretty nice, right? And this would be a way to, for example, modulate to a different scale as well. So we could start with C major like this, and we could end with C minor like that. Very nice and very fast modulation right there. So I realized that especially this video, we've had a lot of new information, augmented sixth and flat twos and Neapolitan sixth chord and inversions and all of that stuff. So it might be one to watch again in case you get lost, and then also look up some of the terminology. There's a lot of great information to find about all of this. In the next video, in the examples, it should also become a lot clearer how we're gonna use these functions in actually making music.